G'day Poetry Geeks, I'm Jackson and you are watching The Poetry Show, and in this Poetry Show we're going to be looking at the time-honoured tradition of writing haiku. Okay, so firstly, what is a haiku? Well, it's a very well-known form of Japanese poetry, you've probably heard of it, and it's a very simple construction on the face of it. It's basically a poem that's divided into 3 lines, at least in English it's divided into 3 lines, and it's presented as 17 syllables. So the first line will always have 5 syllables, the second line has 7 syllables, and the third line has the final 5 syllables in it. So when beginning students of poetry often come across a haiku, that's usually the information they're presented with, and it seems like that's all you need to know. Once you know that it's 17 syllables and 3 lines, you can go off and you can start writing haiku. So it's a very accessible form of poetry and it's very easy to get started with. However, it's not quite as straightforward as that. There's a little bit more to it. For example, haikus are usually known to focus around a theme which is broadly natural in what it approaches. So the theme of a haiku is usually something to do with something that can be directly observed in nature. It doesn't have to be, and particularly modern haikus don't always do that, but that's usually what you'll see in a haiku. Now again, 17 syllables about nature doesn't sound that complicated. But another factor that complicates haikus is that often what a good haiku will try to do is to present 2 different images side by side and to offer some sort of commentary on the juxtaposition of them. Not necessarily a direct comment on them, but by placing these 2 images together, it gets the reader to think about what kind of comparison or what kind of relationship the poet might be trying to suggest exists between these 2 things. So a decent haiku, a better haiku, usually has some element of juxtaposition within it. And another thing that the older, truer Japanese forms of haikus used to have this kind of what they call a cutting moment in the poem. There's usually a word which acts as a kind of turning point upon which the poem actually hinges. And there aren't words that perform that kind of function in English, so what you might find yourself wanting to use is a piece of punctuation that offers that kind of that leap into the comment that you might be making, or that leap into the comparison between these juxtaposed images. So a good haiku often has some element of that kind of turning point within it as well. And like I said, a lot of modern poets in English will use punctuation for that purpose. You can be flexible with that as well. So those are the main things that you try to focus on with a haiku. Like I said, 17 syllables, nature, juxtaposition, and some kind of turning point. So that's a fuller idea of what a haiku should contain within it. But there's another consideration I'd like to share with you when it comes to haiku, and I'd like to use the analogy of photography as an example. In many ways, a haiku is a very quick snapshot of something, and it's easy to think of a haiku as a kind of word photograph, much more so than some other elements of poetry, because it really just gives you an instance, because it has to, given the nature of the very few words you have to play with. So given that it has this kind of snapshot quality, given that it's like a photograph, it's worth thinking of it in terms of it's easy to pick up a camera and just run around, pressing the shutter and taking pictures of everything that you can see. And when you begin in haiku and you begin to just realize that you can throw 17 syllables at something and then that captures it, that's very much the kind of mobile phone photography version of haiku, where you're simply running around and snapping everything. But take a moment to think that there are photographers in the world who get paid professionally to take photos of things and who win artistic prizes. Some of these prizes can have, thousands of dollars of, prize money going for them. So there's obviously something in the craft of photography that benefits more careful consideration of the subject that's being photographed. And the same is true of haiku. Photographers learn composition techniques. A very straightforward one to understand would be something like the rule of thirds. So if you know anything about photography, you would have heard of the rule of thirds before. Haiku can rely on a similar kind of compositional mindset. There aren't necessarily the same kind of structural rules in place like there are for composition, although that turning point is definitely one of them. But you can think of any haiku you write as being a photograph that you have really carefully and intentionally taken, and you've taken the time to think about all of the elements within it before pressing the shutter. So that's the thought I would like to leave you with when talking about haiku. So anyway, I hope this has been a helpful, quick introduction to the idea of haiku. If you'd like to write some haikus for me and put them in the comments below, I'd love to read them. And I mean that genuinely, because I do like reading well-crafted haikus. There's really a very fine art to them. So please leave me your haikus in the comments, and if you would like to learn more about how to write poetry, then you can check out the playlist that this is a part of, or you can subscribe and there'll be new videos on how to write poetry every Saturday. Thank you for watching.